The fluorescent lights of the Goodwill thrift store in Detroit buzzed overhead as 16-year-old Marcus Thompson shuffled through the electronics section, his sneakers squeaking against the worn linoleum floor. It was July 1999, and while his friends were spending their summer break at the mall or playing video games, Marcus was hunting for treasure in the digital graveyard of discarded technology. His fingers traced over dusty keyboards, obsolete monitors, and forgotten hard drives until they stopped on something that would change everything. A beige computer tower, barely the size of a shoebox, marked with a faded price tag reading $5. The machine was ancient by tech standards, a 1987 Commodore 64 clone that most people would have dismissed as electronic junk. But Marcus saw potential where others saw obsolescence. He had been teaching himself programming since he was 12, staying up until 3 in the morning, reading computer manuals he'd checked out from the Detroit Public Library. While his classmates struggled with basic algebra, Marcus was already fluent in assembly language, BASIC, and something far more dangerous: the art of finding vulnerabilities in systems that others assumed were secure. Back in his bedroom that night, Marcus carefully connected the ancient machine to his family's dial-up modem. The computer's processor hummed to life with a sound like an old refrigerator starting up. What happened next would become the stuff of legend in hacker circles. But at the time, Marcus had no idea he was about to pull off one of the most audacious cyber intrusions in NASA's history. He was simply a curious teenager who had discovered that sometimes the oldest keys can open the newest doors. The year 1999 was the dawn of a new digital age. Y2K fears had everyone worried about computer crashes and system failures. But few people understood that the real threat wasn't from dates rolling over. It was from bright kids like Marcus who could turn a $5 computer into a weapon of mass digital destruction. NASA, confident in their cutting-edge cybersecurity, had no idea that their most sensitive systems were about to be breached by equipment that was older than the Space Shuttle program itself. Marcus began his assault at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night, his parents fast asleep down the hall. The Commodore's green screen flickered as he initiated what he called archaeological hacking, using vintage computer protocols to probe modern systems. His theory was simple but brilliant. While NASA had spent millions fortifying their networks against contemporary attacks, they had never bothered to close vulnerabilities that existed in legacy communication protocols. It was like installing a state-of-the-art alarm system on your front door while leaving the basement window unlocked. The first breakthrough came when Marcus discovered that NASA's Deep Space Network, the collection of radio antennas used to communicate with spacecraft, still maintained backward compatibility with communication protocols from the 1970s. These protocols had been designed in an era when the internet was a small network connecting a few universities, and security meant little more than hoping nobody would find your phone number. Marcus realized that his vintage computer could speak this ancient digital language fluently, like a native speaker walking into a foreign land. Hour after hour, Marcus probed deeper into NASA's systems. The Commodore's primitive processor, running at a fraction of the speed of modern computers, actually worked to his advantage. His slow, methodical approach mimicked the natural rhythms of the space agency's own vintage equipment, making his intrusion nearly invisible to monitoring systems that were designed to catch high-speed automated attacks. He was digital camouflage, hiding in plain sight among NASA's own antiquated hardware. By 3:15 a.m., Marcus had gained access to something that made his heart race: the Jet Propulsion Laboratory's mission control systems. On his tiny green screen, he could see real-time data from active space missions, including telemetry from the Mars Pathfinder rover that was still exploring the Red Planet. The irony was staggering. While NASA's engineers were using million-dollar supercomputers to analyze data from Mars, A teenager in Detroit was accessing the same information with a computer that cost less than a Happy Meal. But Marcus wasn't content with just observing. His natural curiosity, the same trait that had driven him to spend countless hours learning programming, now pushed him to explore further. He began downloading files, not with any malicious intent, but with the same compulsion that drives people to read someone else's diary when they find it lying open. What he discovered in NASA's classified directories would haunt him for years to come, and eventually land him in the crosshairs of the FBI. The files Marcus accessed weren't just routine scientific data. Hidden deep within NASA's servers were documents related to something called Project Looking Glass, a classified program that appeared to involve the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The files contained radio telescope data, analysis of unexplained signals from deep space, and correspondence between NASA officials and military personnel about anomalous objects detected by Earth monitoring satellites. Marcus realized he had stumbled onto something far bigger than he had bargained for, something that suggested the space agency was investigating phenomena they weren't telling the public about. As dawn broke over Detroit, Marcus made a decision that would define the rest of his life. Instead of quietly backing out of NASA's systems and deleting his tracks, he decided to download everything he could find related to Project Looking Glass. His vintage computer, with its laughably small storage capacity, forced him to be selective. He chose the most intriguing files, encrypted documents about radio signals from the direction of the star system Vega, internal memos discussing craft of unknown origin, and most remarkably, high-resolution photographs of what appeared to be structured objects on the far side of the moon. The download took 14 hours. Marcus had to keep his computer running through the next day, telling his parents he was working on a school project. Every few minutes, he would check the progress bar, watching as megabytes of classified data flowed from NASA's servers to his bedroom in Detroit. He felt like a digital archaeologist unearthing buried treasure, completely unaware that each downloaded file was creating a trail that would eventually lead investigators directly to his door. Dr. Sarah Chen, NASA's newly appointed cybersecurity chief, arrived at her office at Johnson Space Center on Thursday morning to find her team in a state of barely controlled panic. The intrusion detection system had finally caught traces of Marcus's presence in their network, but the nature of the breach was unlike anything they had seen before. The signature pattern suggested someone was using computer equipment from the 1980s to access their most sensitive systems, a scenario so unlikely that their first assumption was that it had to be a false alarm or a glitch in their monitoring software. But as Chen and her team dug deeper, the evidence became undeniable. Someone had not only penetrated their networks, but had specifically targeted files related to their most classified programs. The intruder had displayed a level of technical sophistication that suggested either a state-sponsored hacker or someone with intimate knowledge of NASA's systems. The possibility that this could be the work of a teenager with a $5 computer didn't even enter their minds. In their experience, major cybersecurity breaches required major resources and professional-grade equipment. Chen made the call to the FBI's Cybercrime Division at 2:30 p.m. that Thursday. Special Agent Mike Rodriguez, a veteran investigator who had worked on some of the Bureau's most high-profile computer crimes, listened to Chen's briefing with growing concern. The files that had been accessed contained information that could compromise national security if released to the wrong people. Rodriguez immediately classified the investigation as Priority 1 and assembled a task force of FBI agents, NASA security personnel, and NSA analysts to track down the intruder. Meanwhile, Marcus was experiencing a mixture of euphoria and terror. The files he had downloaded painted a picture of a universe far stranger and more populated than the public knew. Radio telescopes had detected what appeared to be artificial signals from multiple star systems. Satellite imagery showed objects in Earth's orbit that didn't match any known spacecraft. Most shocking of all, there were references to recovered materials, physical objects of unknown origin that were being studied at classified facilities. Marcus realized he was holding evidence that could revolutionize humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos, and he had no idea what to do with it. The FBI's investigation moved with methodical precision. Rodriguez's team began by analyzing the digital fingerprints left by the intrusion, working backward through network logs and traffic patterns. What they found defied explanation. The attack appeared to originate from a computer system that predated most of NASA's current security measures. The protocols used were so old that several team members had to consult retired engineers who had worked on computer networks in the 1970s just to understand what they were looking at. The breakthrough came when an NSA analyst named Jennifer Walsh noticed something crucial in the data patterns. The timing of the intrusion matched the operational hours of a specific internet service provider in the Detroit metropolitan area. More importantly, the ancient communication protocols being used were consistent with equipment that would have been common in Detroit's automotive industry during the 1980s. Obsolete manufacturing computers that had been surplused out when the factories upgraded their systems. Marcus, meanwhile, was struggling with the weight of what he had discovered. The classified files weren't just abstract data. They told a story of government cover-ups, scientific discoveries being hidden from the public, and evidence of non-human intelligence that had been suppressed for decades. He found himself unable to sleep, unable to concentrate in school, and unable to talk to anyone about what was consuming his thoughts. The $5 computer that had seemed like such a bargain now felt like a curse. 3 weeks after the initial breach, Rodriguez's task force had narrowed their search to a 6-block radius in Detroit. They had identified the specific internet service provider, the approximate time of the attacks, and even the type of computer equipment being used. What they hadn't expected was that their target would be a 16-year-old high school student living with his parents in a modest 2-story house on Corktown's Michigan Avenue. The arrest came at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Marcus was jolted awake by the sound of his mother screaming downstairs. Through his bedroom window, he could see black SUVs lining the street and federal agents in tactical gear surrounding his house. His first instinct was to destroy the evidence, to smash the Commodore 64 and delete every file he had downloaded. But as he reached for the computer's power cord, he realized it was already too late. The files he had accessed contained information too important to destroy, even if keeping them meant facing the consequences of his actions. Agent Rodriguez climbed the stairs to Marcus's bedroom, expecting to find sophisticated computer equipment and evidence of a professional hacking operation. Instead, he found a teenager in pajamas standing next to what looked like a museum piece. A beige computer from the 1980s connected to a small green monitor. The disconnect between the magnitude of the security breach and the primitive equipment responsible for it was so profound that Rodriguez initially wondered if they had the wrong house. But the evidence on Marcus's hard drives was undeniable. Terabytes of classified NASA data, including files related to programs so secret that Rodriguez's own security clearance wasn't high enough to access them. The teenager standing before him had accomplished what foreign intelligence agencies had been trying to do for years, and he had done it with equipment that most people would have thrown away. Rodriguez found himself facing a paradox that would challenge everything he thought he knew about cybersecurity. Sometimes the biggest threats come from the smallest packages. Marcus's interrogation lasted 18 hours. He cooperated fully, walking the FBI through every step of his intrusion and explaining his methods with the matter-of-fact precision of someone giving directions to the grocery store. What emerged from his testimony was a picture of someone who had committed one of the most significant cybersecurity breaches in NASA's history, not out of malice or greed, but out of pure intellectual curiosity. He had wanted to know what was out there, and he had found the technological equivalent of a skeleton key that opened doors nobody else even knew existed. The legal proceedings that followed would set precedents that are still cited in cybersecurity cases today. Marcus faced federal charges that could have resulted in decades in prison, but his age, his cooperation with investigators, and the non-malicious nature of his actions led to a plea agreement that emphasized rehabilitation over punishment. He would serve 2 years in a minimum security facility designed for juvenile offenders, followed by 5 years of supervised probation during which his internet access would be heavily monitored. But the real punishment came from what Marcus had learned. The classified files he had accessed contained evidence that humanity was not alone in the universe, and that government agencies had been aware of this fact for decades. The weight of that knowledge, combined with the legal restrictions that prevented him from sharing it, would follow him for the rest of his life. He had opened a door that could never be closed, and stepped into a reality that he could never fully escape. Dr. Chen's investigation into how a teenager with a $5 computer had penetrated NASA's most secure systems led to a complete overhaul of the agency's cybersecurity protocols. The incident revealed that modern security systems, for all their sophistication, often overlooked the vulnerabilities that existed in legacy systems and backward compatibility features. It was a lesson that would be repeated countless times in the following decades, as cybersecurity experts learned that the most dangerous attacks often came from the directions they least expected. The Commodore 64 clone that started it all was seized as evidence, and eventually ended up in the FBI's Cybercrime Museum, where it sits today as a reminder that the most powerful weapons in the digital age don't always look like what you'd expect. Visitors who see the primitive machine often ask the same question: how could something so simple accomplish something so sophisticated? The answer lies not in the technology itself, but in the human mind that wielded it. A curious 16-year-old who proved that sometimes the oldest keys can indeed open the newest doors. Marcus Thompson was released from federal custody in 2002, his 2-year sentence reduced for good behavior and continued cooperation with cybersecurity researchers. He was prohibited from accessing the internet without supervision until 2007, but the skills that had gotten him into trouble also made him uniquely valuable to the same agencies that had prosecuted him. Today, he works as a cybersecurity consultant, helping organizations identify and close the kinds of vulnerabilities that his younger self had exploited with such devastating effectiveness.